What is up, guys? My name is Lex. Welcome back to the vlog. We're here at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek in South Florida for my weekly 5-10 game. Lineup looks fun, action-packed, a lot of big pots ahead. Let's go. First hand happens about a half an hour in. There's a $25 straddle on. I raise to $75 with ace queen offsuit. Big blind and straddle make the call. 3 ways to ace queen queen, flopping a boat. The run good continues in this game. It checks to me. I decide to slow play here and check. I don't normally like to slow play in action-packed games, but I feel like on this board, it's just best to slow play, try to let my opponents catch up or potentially bluff. On the 3 of hearts turn card, under the gun straddle leads out for 150. I continue to set the trap and just make the call, and the big blind folds. Final card now heads up to the 9 of hearts, and my opponent continues to bet for a $325 sizing. After this bet, it looks like my opponent's got around $1,800 left in his stack, and I have to figure out what sizing I want to raise. I could go for broke and go all in, or I could raise to a sizing that he'll call with a majority of the hands that he's betting with here. I thought on the turn he was likely to have an ace, but now once he bets this river, I think a lot of the time he's going to have a queen, a flush, or even a smaller full house. I decided to just go with a smaller raise size here of $1,100.
Oh, I had a great flop. Whoa. Very good flop.
That's pretty good. That's
Wow.
the worst thing.
Jeez.
Oh, worst river.
Wow.
My opponent quickly calls and flashes ace-10 of hearts for the nut flush. Wow, what a sick cooler. Nut flush versus flopped full house. An over $2,500 pot is going my way.
You can't fold. I thought maybe you had just an ace, but you can't fold the nut flush. Never.
Next up, I am in this straddle position where there's an early position call for 25, a cutoff raise to 75, small blind calls, I call with king, queen offsuit, and the limper calls. 4 ways to a king high board. I check to the initial raiser and the cutoff who bets 125. Small blind player lets go of his cards. I've got top pair, good kicker. I could raise here sometimes, but I think just calling is good, allowing to keep my opponent's bluffs in and worse hands in as well. So I decided to just call 125, other player folds, and now we're heads up to an offsuit 6 on the turn. I check and flow over to my opponent who continues now for $325, and I think just calling is the best play here, but for some reason with around $1,500 left in his stack, I decide to just rip it all in. I go all in for around $2,000 effective. I think this is a very, very thin play. It's kind of hard to get called by worse. However, if he does have a big straight and flush combo draw, he could call. If he has something like King Jack or King 10, he could call. But sometimes I'm going to get snapped off here by aces, ace king, a set, or 2 pair. Luckily, he's thinking over his options. He hasn't snap called yet, which means we're most likely ahead. And eventually he folds what he says was top pair. So maybe I somewhat punted this one. Maybe I went a little bit too aggressive. Could have just check called the turn and maybe check called a bet on the river and got max value. But either way, more chips being pushed in my direction. A few hands after this, I get dealt in pocket aces on the button. I raise and get 1 caller. I check back to be sneaky on the flop, bet the turn, and my opponent folds. We win a small one here. Every half an hour on the dealer change, we do a PLO 4-card double board bomb pot, and they always get crazy.
I even told like I'm in big trouble.
Well, if the 7
one had a
came, I
set.
still
I
have
don't
this.
think my cards could have missed any harder.
On PLO, like nut flop, holding.
Yeah, but I'm saying
It's perfect timing. Around 8 p.m., I get delivered to the table, NYY Steakhouse. I've got myself a steak, lobster bisque, mashed potatoes, and some soft pretzels as an appetizer on the side. Nice. After finishing my steak, soup, and soft pretzel, it's back to the poker. King Jack offsuit, there's a call for 25. I raise to $100 and get 2 callers. I decide not to c-bet the ace 10-7 2-diamond board with a gut shot straight draw. I check back and hit the nuts on the turn with the queen of hearts. Under the gun checks, middle position player bets out for 150, and when you have the nuts on a pretty wet and connected board like this, you're just going to want to raise. I make it $400 to go back over to my opponent who puts in the call. Final card now pairs the board with the ace of clubs. Now, my opponent did just limp call a raise pre-flop. Don't think he's going to have many full houses here like ace 10, pocket tens, or ace queen. I think he'll be raising those hands. But surprisingly enough, my opponent now leads out for a $500 bet. I go back and forth whether I want to just call or if I want to raise. And I think given the pre-flop action, given the fact that he doesn't have many full houses in his range once he limp calls, I'm just going to go for broke here against an ace. I raise it up to $2,500, putting him all in, hoping to get a call from a hand like ace jack, possibly ace 5, ace 4 suited. Back over to my opponent who is in the tank. Looks like he has somewhat of a tough decision. Not really sure what kind of hands he can have here once he leads out, calls my raise, and then leads out again on the turn. I guess a middling ace, possibly just a blocker bet with a hand like a queen. Maybe he was bluffing. I don't know, but eventually he folds. So far, so good. About 3 hours into the session, we are 4 for 4 in big pots, up around $3,000 on the night.
Hey, then come hang with us.
Too much. That's not block-worthy.
I have the nuts on the turn.
I'm just kidding. Don't listen to me what block-worthy is.
I think you're
I have
supposed
no
to run
idea.
good in your own game.
All right, but next week no, you can't have this seat. That's what everybody's saying.
Oh, this is my favorite seat.
Honestly, not too big of a football fan, but the Miami Dolphins are playing the Bills. I decided to put $500 on the game for the Dolphins, and as you guys already probably know, I'm not getting that $500 back. A few hands later, there's a couple calls for $25. I raise on the button with ace-jack offsuit to $125, and as always, this game is action. Everybody wants to see a flop. 1 caller, 2 caller, 3 caller, 4 callers, 5 ways to a pretty dry ace-high board. Now, super multi-way with top pair, good showdown value, but not too strong of a hand. When it checks to me, I decide to get a little tricky and trappy here and check back, also implement a little bit of pot control if I am somehow behind. Turn card's a deuce of hearts, now bringing in a flush draw. Straddled player checks. Middle position player now bets 175. Cutoff player now calls 175. And now I have to decide what I want to do. Both of these players called $25, then called my raise, so we can assume they don't have bigger aces than me, like ace-king, ace-queen. When the middle position player leads out for a $175 bet into over a $500 pot, I think he just has a middling ace that my ace-jack is ahead of, so I decided to go with a very thin value raise on the turn. I make it $500 to go. Back over now to the initial bettor on the turn, who looks at his cards and decides to call $500 over here to the cutoff, and he releases. So now we're heads up to the final card, which is the King of Spades. Opponent now checks to me, and like I said before, he limp called pre-flop. Shouldn't have ace-king, ace-queen, shouldn't have pocket eights for a set, and I think he would be betting bigger on the turn if he did have 2 pairs. Hands like ace-8, ace-4, ace-2, I think would be betting bigger and or potentially raising my $500 raise on the turn. So I decided to bet this river again with my top pair, but I go for a sizing of $600, just around 1/3 size of the pot. Now, this is pretty exploitative, meaning that I'm probably never going to be bluffing for this sizing. If I was going to bluff here, I would probably pick a sizing closer to the pot or maybe a little bit more. But I think sometimes you just got to go with your gut. My gut is telling me that he's got a middling ace and that he'll only call 500 or 600, and that's exactly what happens. He flicks in the chip. I show ace-jack. He shows me an ace and folds. This thin value betting is something I've been trying to work on over the last year. Something that I feared in the past was putting in some larger bets on the river with mediocre strength hands and fear that I was beat. I've been trying to go for more thin value spots. Now, of course, sometimes it always doesn't work out like this. Sometimes you bet and your opponent calls you with a slightly better hand. This time, it worked out in our favor as the chips get pushed in our direction.
If you pee on someone, it's because you can't hold it in. It's an accident.
find
I
a
mean,
problem.
I might have peed on somebody like in the
Mute
shower.
this out of your blog.
In the shower, I might have peed on somebody. No, I'm just not in the mouth or anything, but I might have peed on somebody.
Naveen's got the good. He's got the good idea here. He's got the
I might have
headphones
peed on
on.
somebody in the shower
Right?
before.
Honestly, these conversations that go on at the table, you can't even script it. It's kind of insane, but this just kind of encompasses the game here. Pretty wild. Drinks are flowing, conversations are rambling on, and the topics are definitely interesting. Under the gun limps for 25, hijack races to 125. I call next act in the cutoff with pocket aces. You may be thinking to yourself, Lex, you just flat called a raise with pocket aces? Why would you not 3-bet? Well, I'll explain my thought process. The under the gun player who just called likes to sometimes limp re-raise, and I'm thinking that it's possible he could have limped in this hand looking to potentially limp re-raise, so that's why, or one reason why I just called. Also, I feel like sometimes it's okay to slow play pocket aces pre-flop with just a call, considering that it is the best hand you can get and not really too many flops that you're worried to see. It can allow other players who wouldn't call a re-raise to be in there with moderate to worse strength hands where you can beat them when you under-repped your hand pre-flop. With all that being said, I decided to slow play here. I call 125, button calls, and the under-the-gun player does not limp re-raise, unfortunately. He just makes a call, and we go 4 ways to a 9-high board. This player to my right doesn't seem to be getting out of line too often this session, so when he does raise big to 125 and then c-bet for $300, I put him on bigger pocket pairs, such as 10s, jacks, queens, and kings. I obviously could raise here if I put him on those hands, but also we're still multi-way. I still somewhat want to under-rep my hand. If he is bluffing, I want to allow him to continue to bluff. So I just call next to act, and we're now heads up to the Queen of Hearts on the turn. Now, obviously this is not my favorite card. It brings in pocket queens for a set that's beating me, and it's also a scare card to hands like pocket 10s and pocket jacks. So I am somewhat surprised and also a little bit concerned given this player type. It's possible he could have outturned me or outflopped me with a set. I don't think he has many 2 pairs on this board. Instead of going for a raise on the turn like I was expecting to potentially do, now I'm just going to go into call mode, hoping he's got something like ace queen, king queen, possibly a bluff, or maybe even pocket king. So I call a 650, and the final card is a great one for me, I believe, with the deuce of spades, all flush draws, all straight draws, no 2 pairs get there. And now my opponent continues to bet for big sizing. He throws in a pumpkin and 6 black chips, 1600 versus this sizing. I just don't think I can raise with my hand. I can never fold, so I put in the call.
Oh, nice hand. Yeah, I owe 6. Try to get tricky.
You did.
You can take it.
Well, that slow play is looking pretty dumb when I lose to Queen 9 offsuit. Had him almost dead on the flop. He finds the queen on the turn, and I cannot counterfeit him on the river to lose over $2,600 in this hand. Now, if I would have just 3-bet pre-flop like you should with pocket aces, he would have folded Queen 9 and I would not have lost this hand. But I do think it is important in poker to not be results oriented. I feel like online especially, people are extremely results oriented, meaning that if you make a play and it works, you're a genius. If you make a play and it doesn't work, you're an idiot, a donk, a punter, a terrible player, a fish, a whale. I'll admit sometimes I find myself falling into that as well, but I like to always just go back and look at the play. If you make a great bluff and it doesn't work, doesn't mean that it's always a punt. And if you make a terrible bluff and it somehow does work, doesn't mean that you're the best player that's ever played the game. So I try to look at the play in general, and I feel like sometimes slow playing pocket aces versus that player type in position can be a good profitable play. Unfortunately, this time it did not work out in my favor. Lost around half of my profit on the day, but we're still fighting. Got a couple more interesting hands yet to come. Speaking of punts, I do make a pretty bad bluff attempt. I'll admit myself, end up getting called and losing $1,100 more on the river.
Say my best friend, Jessica. I did that for you.
Good job. Nice.
You were gonna call me? Okay.
Next up here, folds to me in the cutoff. I raise Jack 10 offsuit to $75. Button player cold calls $75. Small blind player folds, and the big blind player re-raises me to $250. Now, when he chooses this sizing, I feel like he's got a good hand, but probably not a premium hand like queens, kings, or aces. Now, this big blind player is pretty special. He is responsible for my best ever performing YouTube video. My last video I posted got over 90,000 views in 2 weeks. The best video I've ever had. This is Steve, the "are you fucking kidding me" guy. The guy I played the $25,000 pot with, where I hit a straight, both runouts versus his 2-pair. Well, when Steve races me, I got to give him some action, so I call a Jack 10 offsuit, and we go heads up here in position to 9, 6, 3, 2 spades. Steve bets out for $200, and like I said, I don't think he's super strong with his raise size preflop. I think a lot of the time he's going to have ace king, ace queen, and when he bets this smaller sizing on the flop, I think I could potentially steal it with a raise, so I make it $750 as a complete airball bluff. Steve snap calls my bet. Uh-oh, yeah, that is not good. Turn card queen of spades, bringing in the flush. Steve checks over to me, and I just don't think he's going to have a flush here very often. I don't think he's going to have aces, kings, and queens. Should I give up, or should I continue to bet? I think if I bet big here, he's just going to fold everything but a flush, and just don't think he's going to have many flushes. So I throw out $2,000 with just stone cold nothing. I mean, I do have the 10 of spades for a blocker, and it does work. He's got ace king offsuit. We get the jack high bluff through, although it wasn't really too big of a bluff. He just had ace high. Either way, take down this last pot. Game runs for another hour. No more significant pots for me. I end up racking up my chips, heading to the cage, and cashing out for the night.
Rogue. Alright guys, that is it for this one. Out here on the balcony with the puppies. We got downtown Fort Lauderdale behind me. It is about to downpour rain. As you can hear, the thunder is rolling in. I feel like every single day here in South Florida in the summer or in the fall, past like 4 or 5 p.m., it just rains every day. It was beautiful throughout the day. Now the rain is coming in. Anyway, as for yesterday's session, it was pretty great. Ended up running super good in the beginning. Won basically every single hand I played. And then I slow played pocket aces. Lost a queen 9 offsuit. That is my fault. Only person to blame is me. I mean, I guess I could have turned out in my favor. He could have just hit a queen or a 9, but ended up losing the biggest pot of the night there with aces versus queen 9. But pretty quickly got it back. Ended up profiting a few $1,000s on the night. I'm trying to continue to grow this game. So far it's been great. I think this is my 12th or 13th consecutive Lexo 510 game at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek, and I just want to continue to grow it. It's just been awesome to see the same people coming back and people becoming more friendly with each other, and every single game is kind of different. It's not always the same players every single week, but it's just fun to get new players in and have old players in, and just been a really great time. I'm hoping to continue to grow it. And as always, if you want to play, if you're in the South Florida area, send me a message at lexopoker@gmail.com or hit me up on Instagram or Twitter as well. I got to get inside before it starts downpouring. You see, it's just all black behind me. Big rainstorm coming in. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, I'll see ya.